Hello, my name is James Paine, and I'm a third-year PhD candidate at the MIT Sloan School of Management in the System Dynamics group. And today, I'm here to talk about my paper, Taming the Bull, an interpretable algorithmic mitigation of inventory and ordering amplification in multi-echelon supply chains. So when I talk about multi-echelon supply chains, what do I mean? For this audience, I don't expect this to be unfamiliar, but when you're a consumer approaching a store and you place an order, you expect some sort of good in return. That store may in of itself be placing orders with their own suppliers, who in turn have their own suppliers. And ultimately, it's this chain of orders and shipments that form a multi-echelon supply chain. And when we're talking about multi-echelon supply chains, we kind of have to talk about bullwhip. And what do I mean by bullwhip? Now, suppose that a consumer has some sort of step change in their order signal. As one moves further and further along the supply chain, one would expect to see this behavior where the supplier's orders increase in amplitude and also in phase shift from the point of that original order signal. And so succinctly, bullwhip refers to this concept of amplification and phase shift in ordering signals along a supply chain when exposed to some sort of initial pulse or step input. What's interesting with bullwhip is we've been talking about this for 60 years. This is persistent. This is a phenomenon that has been discussed in a number of different works prior to this point, notably Sturman's 1989 paper, Corson Donohue's 2006 paper, which highlight this concept of supply chain underweighting as a behavioral feature of the individuals in this multi-echelon supply chain. Slightly more recently, 2015, indicated that individuals with this high cognitive reflection feature may be able to reduce ordering costs along a multi-echelon supply chain. So while many of these prior works have suggested either structural interventions or even behavioral modifications to the managers making these decisions, my hypothesis that there could perhaps be an algorithmic method, and specifically an algorithmic method that closes this gap. It's an opportunity to take this algorithm and form it in a way where it is behaving in a manner that is mappable to some of the original behavioral observations that have been made in some of these prior works, and then also be able to empirically test that. So whenever one is talking about sort of modeling, one needs a framework, and the framework that I choose is the beer game. The beer game, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a classical inventory management and system dynamics simulation learning tool. It has been in use for over 50 years here at MIT. And if anyone has the opportunity to see it, every fall at the beginning of the year, there's a massive run of this game at MIT with all the incoming MBAs, 400 students at times spread across multiple teams, and you really get to see this up close. Even this year, when we weren't able to do this in person, I did an excellent job of going to an online format, which still was able to capture a lot of that amplification and phase shift, and also a lot of the behavioral features that one expects to see in an in-person setting. So ultimately, what I'm talking about in this project is you take this concept here where you have these four human players acting together in an inventory management simulation. And what happens, what can we do to replace one of them with an optimized agent? And are we able to let those other three players still act like humans with their built-in biases and heuristics for their ordering methods, but allow the entire supply chain as a whole to have some sort of reduced cost? So ultimately what I did was I created an optimizable and functional form of the beer game. I created a self-contained simulation of the beer game that then became a callable function that I could then put into an action state pair and then return the updated state of the system given the actions of the players involved. And given this information and some existing data from some prior real world runs of this game, I was able to create sort of a environment in which I could optimize a single agent given a model of realistic human ordering behaviors around that agent. So one of the next goals of this project is to then take this optimized agent and then empirically test it. That is an ongoing portion of this work, but right now, and the purpose of this particular paper is to take a look at what came out of the optimization, and can we qualitatively compare it to some of the prior work about sort of either high cognitive reflection individuals or other individuals' behavioral ordering decisions within this space. So as I discussed earlier, created the self-contained functional form of the beer game. It's specifically based around the Sturman 1989 model of human ordering behavior within the space. Later on, that actually introduces a few caveats and limitations, which I'll discuss a little bit later on. But ultimately, here's the ordering rule. Within this space, agents take a look at both their inflows and outflows of inventory, and then also a sort of a memory of what they believe to be their inflow, their total inflow of expected inventory, and then make a decision on how much to order within a given period of time. So here's an example of some real ordering rule. The top half of this is real ordering decisions that were made and the resulting inventory levels from real players within this beer game back from the Sturman 1989 paper. So given this, my next question is, does my functional form actually replicably reproduce this? And the answer is yes, actually, I think it does. Ultimately, this concept of amplification and phase shift is able to be reproduced in this functionalized form of the beer game. So the actual optimization method itself that I then employed is to then take these series of 4 ordering decisions that all occur simultaneously, but in a coupled fashion, fix one entity to be called my entity over which I'm going to optimize. For all the other entities, go ahead and allow them to make ordering decisions that are based around this concept of human ordering, specifically using values of theta, alpha, S prime, and beta that are taken either from real world data and fits of individuals from prior runs of this game, or from sort of the global averages of those values. Pick a definition of cost. I have 2 concepts of cost here. One is inventory based. This is the classic beer game cost, where there's a cost associated with holding inventory and a cost associated with missing an order, having a backlog, or an amplification based, which is a little bit closer, I feel, to this idea of penalizing specifically an amplification over that original step in customer orders, and then go ahead and vary those parameters for your chosen entity in order to minimize this overarching cost function, which is defined over the entire team. So this is one example within the space. This optimization I ran across all 4 entities and across multiple different configurations of those parameter values for real human players, specifically from individuals, from teams, and from sort of the global mean. The results are qualitatively similar, which is nice for this discussion. But here's one sort of illustrative example, specifically optimizing against the first entity, the retailer, the one who is most exposed immediately to the customer order string. And you can see that optimizing in that space, allowing the other 3 entities to still make human-like ordering decisions, results in a damp system with significantly reduced costs along both cost definitions. One thing to note is that this is kind of important. The retailer does this cost reduction at sort of their own immediate cost. They immediately go into a backlog. They act as sort of an information buffer for the rest of the system, ultimately allowing it to slowly adjust to this new order cycle. This is important for a later discussion about a caveat of this whole system, is that the cost function is defined across the entire supply chain. If the cost function were instead defined across, say, one individual, if this was not, if they were instead a little bit more locally optimizing, we might get different outcomes. So let's now look at those particular sort of values of those 4 parameters that emerged. So this concept of theta within this expression, if you go back up to the top, you can see the ordering rule. Theta is this idea of order smoothing. So for the retailer, the one who's most exposed to the customer order string, they have very low values of theta when optimized versus very high values of theta for everyone else when they are individually optimized. At the end of the day, what theta means is how quickly do I, as a member of the supply chain, take a new order signal and immediately sort of digest it and expect it in the future. And what this means is the retailer is very slow to update their expected future orders, while everyone else is very quick to update. In my mind, this is analogous to trust. If you're within the supply chain, you trust that the other members of the supply chain who are sending you order signals are sending them to you in an accurate and complete manner, and you adjust quickly. However, if you're the retailer, you essentially are being exposed to an entity that's outside of your supply chain. You're slow to pass that information along, and again, act as a bit of an information buffer. Values of beta map directly to this concept of supply chain underweighting, which have been explored extensively in prior work. Somewhat unsurprisingly, all the values of beta quickly approach 1. What this essentially means is that each entity does not forget the orders they've placed. One of the consistent features of sort of humans in this space is they send repeated signals down the stream and then are somewhat surprised when all those signals come to pass. In this case, these entities, once optimized, remember the signals they have sent and expect them to eventually flow through. And finally, and in my mind, most interestingly, this concept of S prime. S prime is really this concept of the entire collection of material that this entity has on order, including inbound material. It quickly approaches this base stock replenishment value that one would expect in this situation for a stationary order stream. This was not necessarily baked into this optimization, but emerged simply as a result of the optimization process, which is a nice sort of tie-in to prior work. So the next question is, are these observations really generalizable? Essentially, can I take this, these optimized ordering rules that were done for a step input and apply them to a general input, in this case, a noisy input, and does that still act in a dampening fashion and reduce the overarching cost? And it does. So ultimately, the parameter values that were sort of trained in this concept of a step function are also dampening and cost reducing when applied to a more generalized order function. One thing to note, and this is a major caveat, even this generalized order stream, this noisy order stream, is still largely stationary. It has no upward or downward trend. This is a major limitation of this particular work. Even the optimization that occurred, specifically that value of S prime, which corresponds, what I said before, to the space stock order value, is sort of limited by this concept of a stationary order stream that's still incoming. One of the sources of that limitation is the data in which I trained this original model to comes from real humans playing this game when exposed to a stationary order pattern. But that does present an opportunity for additional work in the future to open that up a little bit. Something else that I did also consider is how valid are these optimized parameters when applied not at the beginning of time, but rather sort of switched on in the midst of an inventory management crisis and process. Essentially, if you are making what are considered to be sort of normal human ordering decisions throughout this whole time frame, notice you are then suddenly entering into a period of sort of increasing order amplification and phase lag. Is there an opportunity for you to change your ordering heuristics in order to sort of adjust it? So I proposed essentially 3 different concepts of when one could notice that an inventory amplification was occurring by you monitoring both your upstream and downstream ordering rules that are happening to the other entities within your supply chain, and then had this concept of saying, okay, I'm going to switch from the default ordering decision to this optimized ordering decision, and is that still cost reducing and dampening? And the answer is yes. Generally, you can see this here with the green numbers in parentheses. Generally, that still results in a reduction in cost. However, it is significantly less than what one had seen if one had chosen those sort of optimized ordering rules from the beginning of time. It also raises some interesting caveats that highlight the need for an empirical study of taking this and really putting it in the context of real people making decisions. Specifically, I draw your attention to this top corner here. This is the idea of switch and maintain, where at an early period of time, this particular entity noticed that they were entering a period, and this is the distributor in this case, entering a period of increased amplification, change the rule from the default rule to this optimized rule, which was found earlier, and then stayed at that optimized rule. However, the downside of that, as you can see, as time goes on, eventually this entity is maintaining inventory in the safety stock, if you will, that is not strictly necessary now that the situation has kind of passed. The option is to also then switch and then revert back to the old rule. So this does then raise some questions about how does this work from the standpoint of real people making rules in this space? Do they do this idea of switching their decision heuristics midstream? Do they not? That is outside the scope of the present work, which again was mainly saying, can we optimize and then map that optimization to real human ordering decisions, but does raise some interesting concepts for the future. Essentially what this means is that the definition of cost matters. As I mentioned earlier, The concept of cost here is also across the entire supply chain, not just one entity. But ultimately, this does present an opportunity to allow people to be people, specifically saying that these other entities within the supply chain are still modeled as humans making decisions like supply chain underweighting and low cognitive reflection. And yet we're still able to reduce the overarching cost of the system by allowing one entity to act in a way that is optimized across the space, but still bounded by feasible parameter values. So in the future, what I would really like to do is kind of make this a little bit more robust, allow the orders to not necessarily the order string to not necessarily be stationary, and also more importantly, move into a situation in which I can empirically test this in the future. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I greatly look forward to your comments, and I hope you enjoy where this research goes. Thank you. Have a great day.